Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining. I hope you're having a great evening or afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. So as a little icebreaker, let's put into the chat our names, where you're located, and one thing you know about monarch butterflies. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, like if you're not familiar with monarch butterflies, that's okay. That's what you're here for. And like you could just write something like monarch butterflies have orange and black wings or something like that. So pop into chat your name, where you are located, and one thing you know about monarch butterfly. Hi, Winnie and Anthony. Yes, monarch butterflies are a migrating species that connects to when I wrote that they migrate up to 3,000 miles. And a question from Anthony: do monarch butterflies migrate from BC all the way to Mexico every year? Yes, it's true. Monarch butterflies migrate to the southern parts of Canada. Hi, Olivia, which is our other speaker today, and Marcia. Okay, thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. It's nice to see where you're all from. So a little bit about me. My name is Cynthia, and I'm part of Rewild Long Island. I've been with Rewild for 3 years already, and I am now as co-chair of the social media committee, and I'm a founder of Monarchs Matter, which I'm going to talk about today, along with Olivia from the Monarch Missions. Olivia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia, and thank you to everyone here who's joining us today. My name is Olivia. I'm from Vancouver, Canada, and I'm currently the president of Monarch Missions, which is a youth-led as well as officially registered nonprofit that seeks to protect monarch butterflies as well as other crucial pollinators. So since our beginning as just a small passion project almost 2 years ago now, I think that I've learned a lot from planning different events, from doing things like connecting with biodiversity experts, and I'm really excited today to share with you a bit of my knowledge. And I hope that my experiences here in Vancouver, as well as Cynthia's all the way in New York City, will provide you with some inspiration and insight from wherever you're watching.
Yeah, thank you, Olivia. So, a little bit of an overview of what we're going to talk about today. So first, we are going to talk about the basics of monarch butterflies. What are they? Then their decline and the causes of their decline. So why are they endangered, and what we can do to help to restore their habitat and participate in community science projects. And then we are going to introduce each of our organization. Olivia is going to introduce the Monarch Missions, and I'm going to introduce Monarchs Matter and how you could get involved in these two organizations. And then lastly, we're going to do a Q&A, and if we have time, a Kahoot activity.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much for starting us off, Cynthia. Let's just start really simple at the start of this presentation then. So what exactly are monarch butterflies and sort of what's going on with them in the status quo? So first, it's important to note that monarchs are a very important pollinator whose native habitat is Central North America. Now, that being said, they do migrate great distances, so you'll also find that they reside really wherever suitable feeding and overwintering habitats exist. So this can basically be anywhere across the greater North American region. And then, as many of you already put in the chat, you know that each fall, monarchs will go on a very long migration journey. This is like 4,000 to 5,000 kilometers, all the way from southern Canada to their wintering sites in Mexico. Another fun fact is their diet. So adult monarch butterflies will feed on essentially the nectar of many different kinds of flowers, but they do breed exclusively on milkweeds. So while they're still larvae, the only food that they will eat is actually the milkweed plant. And the issue right now is essentially that these types of plants, so these milkweeds, do not exist in adequate enough amounts for breeding to effectively occur as well. So human intervention, things like pollution and deforestation, has caused the decline of the monarch butterfly population. And specifically, Here in Canada, the Endangered Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife actually named the monarch species as endangered back in 2016. So that's a little bit about monarch butterflies and their current situation. And now I think Cynthia is going to talk about reasons.
Yeah, so onto the decline of monarch butterflies. Monarch butterflies have been decreasing in numbers for a pretty long time since the late 1900s. So on this graph, you could see that the highest they peaked at 18 hectares in the winter season of 1995 to 1996, and now they're at less than 1 hectare for 2023 to 2024 overwintering season, which is a drastic 95% decline. And this year, for this winter season, it's also the second lowest overwintering count on record in the past 50 years. And this has been a really large issue. So in the summer of 2022, they marked monarch butterflies as endangered, specifically the IUCN decides this. They decide the category of how threatened a species is. So they were endangered in 2022, but then they were changed to vulnerable, which is down a category in December of 2023. And this year in December, they're going to reassess that category to see if monarch butterflies are going to stay as vulnerable or their status is going to change to endangered. And also another thing I would like to note is that on this graph, you could see that the population is estimated with hectares, and this is because monarch butterflies are relatively small insects, so it's hard to count, like specifically their numbers and how many butterflies there are. So they use hectares, which is the total area occupied by monarch colonies at overwintering sites in Mexico. So monarch butterflies hibernate in Mexico during the winters, and scientists measure the area of the sites that they occupy. And this sort graph is from Monarch Watch, which is one of the organizations I'm going to dive into later since they have a lot of other programs and projects that you can also participate in to support monarch butterflies. So onto the causes of the decline. This 95% decline is obviously not natural. It's completely because of human interference. So the three major issues are deforestation, pesticides and herbicides, and climate change. So the first issue is deforestation, specifically the deforestation of oil mill fir forests in Mexico, where the monarch butterflies hibernate during the winter, as you can see in this migration map. And they depend on these oil mill fir forests to protect themselves from the winter, so low temperatures and also precipitation or any snow. So you could actually see that in this aerial photo of the oil mill fir forest, the trees appear orange because of the huge colony of monarch butterflies that's hibernating in the trees. So monarch butterflies need this habitat to survive the winter, but due to deforestation, this habitat is increasingly becoming unavailable. The second issue is pesticides and herbicides. Some of us might apply pesticides to get rid of pests, but they also get rid of the native species and native pollinators that we want in our area, like monarch butterflies. This photo is from Beyond Pesticides, where there was mosquito spraying in the US, which led to a mass mortality event in monarch butterflies, which is really unfortunate. So it's important for us to use more natural and alternative methods to ward away pests in our gardens, like using mulch, specifically cedar mulch, which naturally repels pests, and planting like herbs that also repel pests in your garden. And the second is herbicides, which, like pesticides, you usually use them to get rid of the weeds or plants that you don't want, but they also kill the plants that you do want, like native milkweed, which is the plant that monarch butterflies only feed on, and a plant that monarch butterflies only lay their eggs on. And lastly, we have climate change. So due to climate change, temperatures are rising, which disrupts the environmental and temperature cues for monarch migration, hibernation, and reproduction. And also, climate change causes more extreme weather events, which causes severe winter storms and more like higher temperatures, higher precipitation, which causes monarch butterflies to lay less eggs as well.
Okay, so you've heard a bit about causes for the decline as well as sort of how much they've declined over the years. Now let's talk about what you can actually do to sort of help mitigate this sort of decline in their population. So here from our experiences, we've identified four main areas of action. The first one, in my opinion, being the most important, is just restoring natural habitats, right? So Cynthia's talked to you about how lots of the natural places that monarchs reside in have suffered from things like deforestation. And while it may not be entirely feasible to fully, revitalize these forests that have already been cut down, we can assist monarch butterflies in replanting some new habitats for them. So, for instance, Cynthia talked about Monarch Watch, which is a research program based at the University of Kansas. And actually, on their website, you can apply to set up something called an official way station, which is basically a garden box that you plant high nectar plants in, as well as milkweed. And because these are the plants that are crucial for butterfly survival, by planting them in strategic locations that are on their migration path, so that includes really any area in the USA and Canada or Mexico. You're able to sort of expand the habitats for monarchs, as well as provide a crucial resource that supports their entire life cycle. And way stations are actually a lot easier to set up than you might think. Even just repurposing a little bit of land in your backyard could go a long way. Now, secondly, down here in the bottom left is just raising awareness. And this is something that we're committed to doing at Monarch Missions. This is basically just hosting things like social media campaigns, fundraising, or programs at your local school or other organizations. At our organization specifically, we do a lot of hybrid events where we both fundraise and raise awareness within our community. So we try to engage other youth and other citizens as much as possible through all of our events. And obviously, while we acknowledge that raising awareness alone is inadequate a lot of the time, it can be a really important first step in inspiring future change. And we think that this is especially important because it really gets people to acknowledge the vulnerable status of monarch butterflies that Cynthia talked to you about. Because in our experiences, for instance, for me, when I first started Monarch Missions, we were really surprised at how many people were actually just unaware that this is a species that's being threatened altogether. Because, unlike other endangered animals, things like polar bears or red pandas, which people don't out in the wild at all. A lot of people were telling us, well, life, which must mean that, they're not truly threatened yet. But this is because, as Cynthia told you about, the decline in their population is actually quite a recent phenomenon, with their population dropping 50% just this past year. So just because, people have seen the species out in the wilds before, doesn't mean that they exist to quite the same quantity currently. So that's a little bit about raising awareness and getting people to actually buy into the issue. The last two solutions, reducing waste as well as sustainable transportation, are more about on an individual level, what is an effective way to mitigate the impacts of climate change on the monarch population. Again, as we've touched on a little bit before, we've told you that the changing weather patterns due to climate change can and will disrupt monarchs' migration cycles and journeys. So that's just a little bit about what we can do as individuals to try to mitigate that impact.
Yeah, and along with these key areas of action, we like to highlight specifically becoming a citizen scientist. So you can participate in community science projects to help scientists better understand monarch butterflies which informs more effective conservation strategies. So one of these community science projects is the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, or MLMP. MLMP collects monarch and milkweed data from citizen scientists, like, which could be anyone. You could, as long as you have a milkweed site, you could collect data like the milkweed species on which monarchs were observed, how many milkweed plants you checked, the area of your site, the number of eggs and caterpillars for each instar stage, which Olivia is going to talk about when we discuss the life cycle, the number of chrysalises or pupa, and then the number of adult monarch butterflies. So you could find this data portal at mlmp.org, and you could monitor milkweed sites and submit data on your own. If you have milkweed in your yard, that's perfect. Or you could, if you volunteer at a community garden, you could also monitor the milkweed at those sites. Like for Monarchs Matter, we have the Raise, Tag, and Release, or RTR program for high schoolers. And this is our high school students surveying the milkweed site at the Science Museum of Long Island for eggs, larvae, pupae, and adult butterflies. So we mostly find eggs, which you can see over here. The main way to know that it's the monarch egg is that it's yellowish white in color, and it's also elongated and more oval in shape than circular, and it also has a pointed top with vertical ridges on the side. And we also sometimes find first instar caterpillars, which are the first stage of monarch caterpillars where they just hatch out of the egg. And we also find many monarch butterflies flying around and laying their eggs at these sites. And the second community science project you could participate in is the Monarch Watch Tagging Program. The RTR program for Monarchs Matter also participates in this community science project. It's unlike MLMP, it mainly focuses on the monarch migration. So you could buy monarch tags. So you could see in this photo, there's a little circular tag with an adhesive backing that you could stick onto the monarch butterfly's wings. It's really lightweight, and so it doesn't affect the monarch butterfly's flight. And these tags have a unique code on them. So after you tag the monarch butterflies and they migrate to Mexico, the scientists there will survey the overwintering sites in Mexico, which are the oil mill fir forests, as shown before. And they will look for these tagged monarchs and go to their database online for the tagging data that we submit, which includes when the monarch butterfly was tagged, where it was tagged, whether the monarch is male or female, and all that information that allows scientists to conduct research to inform effective conservation strategies. So for this monarch butterfly you see in this photo, it's one of the monarchs that our high school students from the RTR program raise. And you don't have to raise monarchs, but you could if you want to. I feel like it's a really fascinating process to see the metamorphosis of monarch butterflies, but you could also tag monarchs from the wild. But if you want to raise monarch butterflies, Olivia will talk about the monarch life cycle, so you get a general idea of how you could raise them from egg to butterfly, and when you raise them, you could observe these specific details that Olivia is going to talk about.
Okay, great. A little bit about the life cycle then. Very broadly, and a very summarized version of it is essentially 4 stages. So first, it's the egg stage, and then larva, pupa, and lastly, the adult stage, which is just when they're a butterfly. But a little bit more in depth into each of these stages. So firstly, the egg, which you see pictured here, it's on the far left side. Usually, monarchs will stay at this stage for just around 3 to 5 days, depending on the temperature of the atmosphere around them. And then they turn into larvae, which is also commonly referred to as just the caterpillar stage. And they stay here for around 2 weeks. Essentially, the main thing they do here is just eat milkweed and grow. So they'll grow from around 2 millimeters to anywhere up to 45 millimeters. And this is almost 2,000 times their original mass. Because they're growing so much, they also end up shedding a lot of skin during this stage of their life. They shed 5 times in total, and the period between each shedding of the skin is called an instar. So that's what Cynthia was referring to earlier. And monarchs are going to have 5 larval instars as they shed skin 5 times. So once it is a caterpillar and once it's fully grown, it's going to start crawling away from the milkweed plant after around 2 weeks. And it's going to find a secure location where it forms a silk pad and starts to hang upside down before shedding its skin one last time to turn into a chrysalis, as you can see pictured in the third circular image on this slide. And then from there, in around 8 to 15 days, so around 1 to 2 weeks, it's going to emerge as an adult butterfly. And it's important to note that usually for monarchs, before they actually take flight, before they go like mate and do things like that, they have to spend a few hours pumping fluid into their wings to actually give them shape, as well as spend some more time drying out their wings before they're stable enough to be used for flight.
Yeah, so talking about adult monarch butterflies now. So to tell between male or female, you could tell between using these two characteristics. So first are the pouches, which you could see on the male monarch butterflies, which are the two dots on one of their veins on the bottom sets of wings. And you could also see the dot when the wings are closed, since it bleeds through the other side. But usually it's easier to tell when their wings are open. While for the female monarch butterflies, they don't have these pouches and their veins are thicker, and the butterfly is usually smaller in size compared to the male. But butterfly size can also vary depending on the availability of milkweed when the butterflies are caterpillars. So whether they're male or female is important when you submit tagging data to the Monarch Watch Tagging Program. So when each time you tag a monarch butterfly, you fill in a row of data for each tag. So for example, on this butterfly we tagged last year, the code is AHCX281, and that is put into the tag code column along with the date when it was tagged, whether the monarch butterfly is male or female. You could tell that it's male by the little dot that's bleeding through. And then whether the monarch butterfly was raised or from the wild, this one was raised, and then you put the location of which it was tagged. So specifically for tagging, if you're wondering where you should tag them, it's usually on the mitten-shaped cell, which is also called the discal cell on the hind wing of the monarch butterfly. And it's typically tagged here because it's easier for scientists to spot and see the tag code when they survey the sites in Mexico. And yeah, this is it for the Monarch Masterclass section of this webinar. And now we're going to move on to our organizations and how you can get involved in them.
Okay, so I'll start by talking a little bit about Monarch Missions. So I'm currently 15 and I launched this nonprofit um, a little over a year ago, I think. We currently have a volunteer team of over 50 volunteers from over 13 different schools, and I really think that our teamwork and collaboration has been crucial in raising over 4,000 for donations, as well as funding future events, securing sponsors for our projects, and planning all sorts of programs for elementary and high school aged youth. So here on this slide, you can see some of the things that we've been up to. On the very left-hand side, this is our social media presence, our link tree and website. So whenever people want to learn more about the monarch population, we'll usually refer them to our website, which has updated information. Basically what happens is our volunteers volunteer their time to do research about monarchs, compile facts, read news articles, and then break them down into more digestible bits of information via posting on Instagram, either posts or reels, or uploading it onto our website to engage more people. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see our fundraising events. So this usually takes form as like donut sales or like sticker sales. We also plan on hosting a speech competition as a fundraiser where students will be encouraged to deliver short speeches regarding biodiversity and pollinators. And basically, the main goal of these events is just to raise funds that we then use to buy milkweed and distribute to host things like community programs, as well as donate to other large biodiversity organizations to support their expert research and tagging of monarchs. Lastly, here in the middle are community programs, and we're currently planning some pretty big things internally. So we hope you stay tuned for those. But a bit of a sneak peek, we have an annual conference coming up where we're going to invite different guest speakers on biodiversity and endangered species to talk to our youth, as well as we're going to incorporate rotational workshops where people can do things like plant and take home their own milkweed plant. They can learn how to make butterfly feeders and learn more about monarch migration patterns. And lastly, we're also working on collaborating with local libraries to deliver an event series where our volunteers are going to lead a full course on monarch butterflies following the official National Geographic curriculum surrounding monarch butterflies. And then this next slide is just a little bit more in depth about one of our main initiatives that we're excited to launch very soon. This is called the Milkweed Missions. And basically, on our part, it's just us trying to distribute as much milkweed as possible, preferably in clusters to create concentrated spaces for the migration of monarchs. Basically, logistically, how this is going to work is within our organization, our internal executive team will be preparing everything needed to plant milkweeds. So things like the seeds, soil, everything like that, free of charge to people. And through numerous external planting events where people come plant the milkweed, we'll engage a lot of other people. So whether this be in collaboration with schools, libraries, or community centers. Lastly, they're going to be distributed either into individual households where people can choose to repurpose a portion of their garden to a monarch butterfly garden, or we're just going to plant them into public garden spaces such as community or school garden boxes.
Yeah, thank you, Olivia. It's really inspiring to see another youth-led organization that is also dedicated to protecting monarch butterflies and restoring their habitat. I also started Monarchs Matter about a year ago with the same mission of educating youth, which is our future climate activists and environmental activists. So I feel like it's really important to educate them on issues like the monarch decline. Specifically for the Raise, Tag, and Release or RTR summer program, we teach youth how to raise and tag monarch butterflies, which is important because youth could see the entire metamorphosis of a monarch from egg to butterfly, which is always really fascinating. And then after, when we tag them, we hold the monarch butterflies and bring them to our community gardens to release, where we could see them happily feed on all the nectar flowers and native plants. And we also, as part of our Raise, Tag, and Release program, tag and monitor monarchs for the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, and also talk about what we just did in this webinar. So the monarch decline, the life cycle, to understand how they survive, how they live, and how we should help them. And for outside the summer program, we have community workshops and release events. So we collaborate with other grassroots organizations like the Baxter's Pond Foundation in this photo, where we talk to families and discuss the monarch decline with them to engage our community, also raise awareness about this issue. And lastly, we have milkweed distribution. Earlier in July, we distributed 100 swamp milkweed plants to over 30 students in our RTR summer program for them to plant into their yards and support monarch butterflies through their own homes. And also, milkweed doesn't just support monarch butterflies, but it's also a native species. So it supports all kinds of other native insects like milkweed beetles, ladybugs, aphids, ants, and it contributes to our whole ecosystem as a whole. And another plus of native plants is that it sequesters carbon into the ground, which helps mitigate climate change. And I would also like to mention that planting native plants, they're pretty low maintenance since native plants originate from the land that they usually grow in. So that means the climate and soil conditions are fit for them to naturally thrive. So plant natives in your garden if you want to see beautiful results. And for a little bit about how you could get involved in Monarchs Matter if you're not sure where to start. If you don't have a program like Monarchs Matter in your community, you could always start your own chapter. And if you're not sure how to start, again, we could guide you in this process and fund your new chapter for you. So if you're anywhere in North America, in Canada, US, or Mexico, where monarch butterflies, along the migration path of monarch butterflies, you are free to reach out to us and learn more about this opportunity. The second is that we're working to build monarch way stations. So if you already have a garden and want to get it certified as a monarch way station, then you could reach out to us and we could fund that for you. So Monarch Way Station, basically, there's the Monarch Watch Way Station program, and you could sign up for the sign and certificate bundle. And if you put the sign in front of your garden, it shows to people, your community and people who pass by, that your garden is dedicated to protecting monarch butterflies. And they could read more about that on this sign, which also encourages other people in your community to build monarch way stations. And if you don't have a garden yet and want to get it funded, Rewa Long Island has its community gardens program. So if you apply next year around March of 2025, if you're located in Long Island, New York, you could get a garden built with the help of Rewa Long Island and their expert landscapers. And lastly, if you're a high schooler or know a high schooler that's interested in hands-on environmental work, you could sign up for the Raise, Tag, and Release program for the summer of 2025. The 2024 program just ended, but there's always next year if you want to participate in it, and we're going to improve a lot of our activities, so look forward to that. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for listening and watching. Do you have any questions?
Thank you so much. I think there's a few questions in the chat. So for the first one regarding how to raise monarchs, um, it seems that the issue is that this particular person has been seeing a lot of monarch eggs, but no caterpillars, presumably because predators are getting to them. I think that Cynthia would probably be able to answer this better with her experience, but I think just quickly from what I've like gotten to know throughout my research, I believe that a very like low percentage of the eggs actually do make it through the entire life cycle and become actual adult monarchs. So this is like a pretty normal occurrence. And I think that in the past, what a lot of people have done is sort of bring the eggs indoors for a few days, since they only really stay in that stage for 3 to 5 days. So having them inside, for instance, within like a mesh cage or something like that, could help them to develop into caterpillars before releasing them back out into the wild. But yeah, Cynthia, if you want to add anything, feel free.
Yeah, I think you hit all of the key points. So, if you want to know specifically how to harvest eggs, first you need to identify the eggs, which you could find a lot of videos and tutorials online about that. And then after you identify them, you could um, get them off of the milkweed plant by cutting the leaf that the egg is on off of the milkweed plant and bring it inside until it hatches. And then you could put them into a small container. Usually don't put like more than like 3 or 4 caterpillars in a container to um like reduce the spread of disease and all that. And after you put the caterpillars, like the caterpillars hatch and they need more food, so you add milkweed into the container, and that process continues until they reach their fifth instar stage, which is the final stage of the monarch caterpillars. And then you transfer them when they're in the fifth instar stage to a mesh cage where they will crawl to the top of the mesh cage and form a chrysalis. And after like 1 to 2 weeks, the monarch butterfly will emerge. For the second part of your question, that you've seen eggs but no caterpillars, yeah, Olivia, as she said, there's like a really low survival rate of monarchs in the wild, so bringing them in could help to avoid predators, and specifically their survival rate is 2 to 10%, like only 2 to 10% of monarch eggs make it to the butterfly stage. So if you want to bring them in, that could be really helpful to protect them from predators. And then the second question is, oh, also I want to mention that I'm working on Monarch Manual, which is an all-in-one guide to raise monarch butterflies. I'm still working on that, but if you want to get any updates on that when that's out, you could sign up for the newsletter at monarchsmatter.net. And yeah, and also if you want to learn more about Monarch Missions, you could go to their link tree. The second question is there a place in Vancouver dedicated or helping monarchs thrive? Is milkweed all that is needed? So for the first question, Olivia, do you want to address that?
Yeah, for sure. So, specifically, actually, Monarch Missions has been looking to find collaborators within the Vancouver region, just because, organizations that are geographically proximate to us, it's probably more feasible for us to do things like collaborate on initiatives with them. We haven't been able to find actually very specific organizations that are solely dedicated to the monarch. I do know that there is an initiative that's not necessarily local within Vancouver or British Columbia, but it is all across Canada, and it's by the David Suzuki Foundation, and it's one of their initiatives called the Butterfly Way Story, which is basically like a sort of an initiative where they get like amateur gardeners to sort of plant milkweed and other nectar plants like across the country. Our problem with it is just that it sort of has a very strict like cycle annually, and if you miss the application date to become like what they call a ranger, which is just someone who plants the plants, you kind of like can't do anything about that. So actually, when we first started up the organization, we also sort of identified this gap in protecting biodiversity and endangered species. And we would say that the lack of organizations that are specifically dedicated to this cause is probably one of the reasons that we decided to found the organization, because Vancouver being one of the areas that are on the migration path of monarch butterflies, we thought that there ought to be some sort of an organization that is actually, like creating these habitats for them so that we don't become a place where they just all die off. So yeah, that's a little bit about the first question. Cynthia, did you want to take the next one?
Yeah, so for planting milkweed, that is the main solution that we try to emphasize for supporting monarch butterflies, since milkweed is the sole host parent of monarch butterflies, meaning that monarchs only lay their eggs on milkweed, and milkweed is the only food source of monarch caterpillars. So if you plant milkweed, that could be a huge help. I know a lot of people in New York, after they planted milkweed in their yards, they like in the summer they saw a lot of butterflies come. So by planting milkweed, you will see the results and you will see butterflies come. Um, and that is like the most effective solution. But if you want to help other aspects of the monarch decline and help scientific research on monarch butterflies, you could also participate in the community science projects I mentioned, which is the Monarch Watch Tagging Program. I'll put that in the chat. And you could find them at monarchwatchtag.org, and then mlmp.org for the Monarch Larva Monitoring Program project. Okay. We're going to take these two more questions in this chat, and then we're going to move on to the Kahoot quiz. It'll take about 5 minutes, so we'll be done by 8 o'clock. So for the third question, what are the precise genetic, neurological, and environmental factors that enable monarch butterflies to navigate their multi-generational migration, and how could climate change disrupt this finely tuned system? How are we seeing this in Vancouver? So for the first part of the question, some environmental factors that monarch butterflies look out for to know like when to migrate is temperature cues. So if temperatures are decreasing, that's one of the factors that, we know to migrate to Mexico because the winter's coming. Also, when the days are getting shorter, which is also a sign that the winter is coming. For genetic and neurological factors, I'm not specifically sure like how it works, but that's a good question, and I'll probably look into that after the webinar. If you have any other questions or want to reach out, you can always email us at monarchsmatter.net at gmail.com and the Monarch Missions at gmail.com. So,
Yeah.
Olivia, do you want to answer the second part of the question?
Yeah, for sure. So how this actually manifests within the Vancouver region, I think that first of all, since Cynthia told you about environmental factors that affect the monarch butterfly population, obviously things like the changing climate is something that Vancouver experiences as well. So because of the changing climate, when monarch butterflies depend on environmental cues, such as like temperature, for instance, to trigger things like their migration patterns, their reproduction, as well as their hibernation, their dependence on these types of cues are sort of messed up, or like improperly calibrated when the like temperature sort of changes and is not what they're genetically used to. I think that sort of answers the kind of genetic neurological part of the question as well. It's just that like over the generations sort of they've been conditioned, or like the temperature that they've been conditioned to take as a cue to do things like reproduce or migrate are now being messed up because the temperature is changing in the first place. And this is observable obviously all across North America and all across the world. And specifically in Vancouver, this is also something that is an active barrier to the monarch butterfly population being able to thrive well.
Yeah, and for the last question, will you please address the issue of the butterfly bush? Is it harmful? I haven't heard about it a lot, but since it's an invasive plant, then yes, it could be harmful since it suppresses native plants which support wildlife, while invasives don't come from somewhere that's not native to the land. So that means it doesn't support the native wildlife in your area if you see butterfly bush. So yes, it could be harmful if it spreads really quickly and suppresses other native plants. I think that's all the questions that we have right now. If you have any other questions, as always, you can email us, which we put in the chat. And now we're going to move on to the Kahoot activity as like a little fun quiz to see if you got all the key points of this presentation. But if you didn't, we will review each question and talk about it a little bit more if you have any other questions. So I will stop sharing. Okay, so first question, true or false? The monarch population has declined by 95% since 1996. Yay, okay, true.
Yay.
The second question, which IUCN Red List category are monarch butterflies currently in? Remember that they changed between 2022 and 2023. Yep, they were endangered. Well, it depends on where you are. Like in Canada, they're endangered, but for the IUCN Red List of threatened species, they are vulnerable, and that category will be reassessed in December of this year.
And just to be clear, vulnerable would be one step down from endangered, so
Mhm.
less serious than endangered.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Which is
third
a
question,
cloud?
which is
Oh, sorry.
there are multiple correct answers to this one. Yep, all of you got it right. So pesticides, well, I should have put pesticides and herbicides, and then deforestation and climate change. Poaching is not really an issue, although poaching has become illegal in many areas because like of the monarch decline.
Where do eastern monarch butterflies spend their winter? Either Canada, United States, Australia, or Mexico.
This question asks specifically eastern monarch butterflies. So from eastern US. So yeah, Mexico. They migrate from the US and Canada to Mexico to spend their winter, and then they migrate back to the US and Canada during the spring and summer. And for Australia, there are monarch butterflies there, but it's not the migratory species. Only the migratory species is vulnerable. Next question. Monarch larvae or caterpillars only eat which plant? Grass, coneflower, parsley, or milkweed? It's in the photos, if you could identify the plant. Yes, milkweed. Well got correct. Marcia's in the lead.
So what does the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, shortened as the MLMP, do?
One of them is the answer to what the Monarch Watch Tagging Program does. But the MLMP is a bit different. Yeah,
Okay.
so it collects milkweed and monarch observation data from citizen scientists. So you go to the milkweed site, that could be from your own garden or yard, or at a community garden, and you find if there are any eggs or caterpillars, chrysalises, butterflies, and you record the count and submit that onto the MLMP data portal. And they don't regulate the larva populations, they just receive the count of them, and then they do research based off of um, how many, like their density, the egg density, the caterpillar density, and for red, that's what the Monarch Watch Tagging Program does. So the tags help um, us understand the migration better. Okay, so which egg belongs to a monarch butterfly? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Yes, it's three. So the main ways that you could tell that it's a monarch egg is that it's yellowish white in color. It's elongated in shape and has a pointed top, and it also has vertical ridges. This egg kind of looks similar, but the monarch egg is like rounder and the color is slightly different. This one is a cabbage white butterfly egg.
On to question 8. How many instar stages do monarch caterpillars go through? 3, 4, 5, or 6? So as a reminder, instar stages are the period of time between each shedding of the skin. So how many times? Okay, yay. 5, yeah, that's right. So the life cycle of the monarch butterfly includes the caterpillar stage where they will go through 5 instar stages, throughout which they will, grow a lot, and yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and a fun fact is that they grow 2,000 to 3,000 times their size in just 2 weeks through the 5 instar stages. And they get to grow this large because they eat a lot of milkweed and they also shed or molt their skin, which allows them to expand. So number 9 is the monarch butterfly on the right, male or female? So on the right, the butterfly has the 2 pouches on the wings. Yeah, so it's a male because if they're the 2 dots, also called the pouches, that's a male butterfly. If it doesn't have the pouches, it's female, and you could also tell it's female if it has thicker veins, which are the black lines on the wings.
Okay, a few questions left. Question 10. What is the purpose of the Monarch Watch Tagging Program?
Mastering monarch butterflies, or understanding the dynamics of the monarch migration, studying the impact of predators on monarch survival rates, or mapping monarch habitat to identify key areas for conservation. Yeah, so it's understanding the dynamics of monarch migration through mark and recapture. So you mark the monarch butterfly by putting the tag on, which has a unique code. And then after the tagged monarchs migrate to Mexico, the scientists there look at the code on the tags which is like the recapture part, to retrieve the data about the tagged monarch. So where and when it was tagged, whether the monarch is male or female, and they use that data to conduct monarch research specifically on their migration. Since you look at where the monarch was tagged versus if it survived and got to Mexico to hibernate. Okay, so second last question, where do you place a monarch watch tag? Onto the pouch, the dot on the hind wing that differentiates male or female. Center of the hind wing on the discal cell, the mitten-shaped cell, or on top of the abdomen. Yep, so it's center of the hind wing on the discal cell or mitten-shaped cell, which is this one right here, because it kind of looks like a mitten if you look at it on the side.
Okay, last question. Why are monarch butterflies important? Think about all of the ways they can contribute to your daily life as well as the broader ecosystem.
Yeah, so they were all correct. They serve as a food source, even though they're poisonous from consuming milkweed. A lot of, well, not a lot, but like a few species of birds and small mammals like mice or insects also consume them as a food source, contribute to biodiversity because they're part of the food web and help pollinate flowers. And they represent cultural symbols like for in Mexican culture for the Day of the Dead, monarch butterflies is a significant cultural symbol since the Day of the Dead is usually around a time where monarch butterflies migrate back to Mexico. So on to the podium. So third place we have, oh, my Zoom thing is blocking, Zen. Second is R, and first is Marcia. Yay! Okay,
Good job.
so runners up, Winnie and Anthony.
Great job, everyone.